Okay, you hear me now? Yeah, there's lots of steps I have to go through to broadcast, and if I miss one, things happen like that and I need to start over. So if our connection breaks, I will start a new stream. Looks good right now. So we're going to start where we left off. I'm going to discuss experiments. Do you have any questions? I don't know if I mentioned that the quizzes online are for unlimited tries. You can attempt them as many times as you like, and the minimum quizzes you need to do is one in each section of the course, and there's 8 sections. Okay, but I recommend, of course, that you do them all. And if you have any questions about the quizzes online, let me know. Okay, so there are elements of the experiment that we need to discuss. It wasn't discussed like this in the video, but we're going to use this terminology, okay? So as I mentioned, there are some things in here that are complementary to the video material. So we call an experimental unit, or experimental unit is used to talk about the subject, okay, of the experiment. It's what or who is acted upon or treated. The treatments of an experiment are the experimental condition or conditions applied to a unit. The response is a variable that measures how the unit responded, or the subject responded or reacted. Factors are the variables that we think will explain the response. Well, we're going to see if we're going to measure the relationship between the treatment, the explanatory variables associated with the treatment, and any response. And so those are called factors. And factors could have levels like, and you'll see in the examples, you might want to try different doses, for instance, of a medical treatment. And so those would be the levels of the factor, that particular treatment, but different doses. All right, so here's my first experiment, just to practice the defining or laying out the elements of the experiment. Get an individual to consume 1 ounce of alcohol and measure the blood alcohol level after 1 hour to investigate the impact of alcohol on blood alcohol level. In this experiment, the experimental unit is the individual consuming the alcohol. The treatment is the ingestion of alcohol. The response is the blood alcohol level after 1 hour. The factor is the alcohol. So this sounds repetitive, but it's important to know both terms. Okay, so factor refers to explanatory variable. Treatment is what it looks like in the experiment. And the level, we're just going to use 1 ounce of alcohol, but if we wanted to have more levels of the factor, we could consider using different percentage alcohol content and introducing classes of alcohol or groups of alcohol. So vodka having 20%, wine having 15%, etc. Those would be different levels of the factor alcohol. So what kinds of experiments work? So you learned in the video about the randomized comparative experiment. Now these experiments work as long as you observe the 3 R's of experimental design: representation or control, or through control, randomization, and replication. So we're going to talk about each of these in turn. We hope to see differences in the responses so large that it is unlikely to happen just because of chance variation. We can use the laws of probability, which give a mathematical description of chance behavior, to learn if the treatment effects are larger than we would expect to see if only chance were operating. Okay, so if they are, we call them statistically significant. An observed effect so large that it would rarely occur by chance is called statistically significant. So by the end of the course, you'll know how to identify a statistically significant effect. So we begin with looking at what it is to have representation. So what you want to be able to say is that the response was as a result of the treatment, not individual characteristics of the participants or subjects. So in human experiments, we use a control group, as I explained yesterday, use a control group to create a baseline above which a treatment the treatment group should have superseded. Okay, they should do better than the control group does, depending on what better means in your particular experiment. So through representation, you ensure that you're controlling the effect of lurking variables on the response. Okay? So here we have, I'm going to describe this second experiment. So the first one was about blood alcohol. I'm going to lay out this type of experiment, and we're going to discuss how good it is as an experiment. We want to investigate a new solution or a treatment for gastric ulcer. Gastric ulcers produce acid in the stomach or in the gastrointestinal system, and that acid creates discomfort and pain. So it was imagined that a treatment that administers a solution directly on the site could be a therapy to alleviate that pain and discomfort. The thing is, if you swallow something, it'll be affected by it might not get to the site of the ulcer. So instead, using ultrasound and a tube, a gastric tube, is inserted through the throat down to the location of the ulcer. So that is the method for administering the treatment. The experimental unit would be a patient with gastric ulcer, so they've already been screened and it's been determined where their ulcer is. The treatment would be the solution applied to the location of the ulcer in an effort to reduce the production of acid and alleviate pain. The response would be the self-reported level of pain of the patient. We would say the factor is the solution applied, and the level of the factor is the temperature of the solution. I put it like that, but it's a cooling solution, and we believe it's the cooling that has that effect. Okay, so you can have like different kinds of treatments that would cool the site. Like menthol could be cooling to the body. Is it menthol, or I'm thinking of the term? But anyway, there's different ingredients that could be cooling or have a cooling temperature effect. So this is the experiment. These are the elements of the experiment. And let's say it was determined that the experiment had a positive or a reported positive outcome. A great number of the participants felt better after the treatment. Is this a good experiment? So the way it would be conducted is the individual would be invited to participate. They would have been screened in advance, and then on the day of the treatment, they would arrive and possibly be given a gift for participating in the experiment, or at least having their parking paid for, so that there's an added incentive for them to come to a clinic or to a hospital to participate in the experiment. When they arrive, a nurse greets them and asks them a series of questions, or has them fill in a pre-treatment survey. The treatment is applied, possibly the throat is numb with an anesthetic, so the discomfort is not felt when the tube is inserted. Then after a while, after they sit in observation, post-treatment, after an hour or so, their level of pain is again recorded. Okay? So what's wrong with this experiment? Is there anything wrong with this experiment, the way that I've outlined it? Okay, so very good, Nivette. So there's some things missing here. First, this is human subject experiment. In human subject experiments, we know that they suffer from placebo effect and Hawthorne effect, possibly. And so we need to control against that. So we need to add a control group. And also, Nivette mentions the double-blind aspect. If we add a control group, neither the people in the treatment group, the control group, nor the research staff should know what treatment the patient is receiving. So we should be conducting this in a different way. And let's see if I can outline the actual experiment that is a good experiment. Here we're going to invite our patients and then randomize them into treatment and control group. The treatment would be a cold solution applied to the location of an ulcer to reduce the production of acid. The response would be their self-reported level of pain. The factor is still, so these are all the same. Is the solution applied to the ulcer? But what's going to change is this, the level of the factor. The treatment group will get this cold solution, right? This cold temperature solution. And the control group would just get a body temperature liquid. It would behave like a body temperature liquid in the body. So that we have to devise this experiment so that the staff administering the treatment doesn't know which one they're administering. They're going to have to be in some sort of thermal container that they can't measure or feel the temperature of the solution that's being administered. So when it's conducted like this, it turns out in my hypothetical experiment that now the freezing, cooling has no effect on the patients, because the general feeling, the improvement that patients reported for the control group that looks too big, was superseded. by the treatment groups. So this, it would have to be superseded by the treatment group. But to have no effect, this would be like this. So what I've done here is said, here, let's say 40% of people indicate they feel better, and here it's 41%. That's not enough to speak of statistical significance, okay? So these are considered not different. These could just be generated by chance, not attributable to the treatment. Okay? So why would patients actually in a control group say they feel better? Because, well, someone's giving them attention, they have they've had a really good interaction with the staff, someone's listening to their story and concerned about their pain, and they just feel hopeful that they're going to feel better. And because of that, whether they receive the treatment or not, they have a general sense of well-being and less pain. Because when you feel better, the natural endorphins in your body help you mitigate any kind of discomfort. You're distracted by other things and you don't feel that pain. But it's short-lived and it will come back. So it's important not to rely completely on placebo effect, to actually find treatments that are effective. Okay, I'm going to read the other comment. Right, very good. Good comments. All right. So experiment 3. This is the one. It's a variation on the one you saw in the video, or was described in the video. In fact, the physician's studied the effect of aspirin on reducing mortality due to heart attack at the same time that it studied the effect of beta-carotene on reducing mortality attributable to cancer. So they actually studied 2 factors, and this is the experimental design here. And because I have 2 factors, and given this is human subject study, I have to have a control group. So these groups of people both got beta-carotene. These groups here both had aspirin. And in the other group, these people did not get beta-carotene, and these did not get aspirin. They just got a placebo. So that actually creates 4 treatment groups. People that got both aspirin, beta-carotene, and people who got both placebos. Now we have to assume that there's no confounding effect of a person taking the beta-carotene on the chance of a heart attack, and similarly there should be no effect of taking aspirin on reducing chance or affecting or causing cancer. So they shouldn't be confounding each other. So I guess they determined that before they underwent developing the design for the experiment and conducting it. All right, so I have some questions for you. This study engaged 21,996 male physicians. Why did they use males? Why did they use physicians? That's my question. Very good, Yvette. So, because men are more susceptible to heart attacks and mortality due to heart attack, well, not, we'd like to help them, or we want to have answers for men, but also it makes it easier to see, we don't have to study as many people to see heart attacks, okay? We don't have to observe so many cases to be able to see heart attacks. If we were going to engage a study with women, we'd have to have way more subjects to be able to see enough heart attacks in the course of 5, 6, up to 10 years. I don't know, this was a longitudinal study, and once they decided that they determined it was effective to use daily aspirin to reduce heart attacks, they just stopped the study and reported the findings so men could start using, or anyone really could start using aspirin to mitigate or to prevent heart attack. So the reason then is men are more prone to heart attack, and so we'd be able to see the results in a smaller study, less costly study than if we did it with women. We'd have to have much more subjects engaged, and we'd have to, it would cost more. So now, why do they use physicians? Why didn't they have construction workers, real estate agents, professors, nurses, doctors? Only doctors. And honestly, I don't know the exact reason. I'm speculating. But I think we have enough knowledge to be able to do that at this point. Okay, so you've all made good points. So some of you have said doctors might be more likely to participate. That's true. Also, doctors are more likely, it's easier to follow them. Compliance and transiency are two factors that make it difficult to conduct longitudinal studies. So the fact that people move away or you lose touch with them and they drop out of the study, and that can affect a study that has been done in a certain way to assign people, treatment and control groups. So you're going to end up biasing your results if you lose too many people in the control group who are not seeing an effect. Maybe they're leaving, and that's going to bias your results. So doctors are less likely to, it'll be less likely to lose them because they're licensed practitioners and they have to be registered and you could find them, right? So that's important. And they're also probably much more inclined to participate and comply. When you're part of a study, taking supplement or taking treatment every day, who's going to do that? I was part of a study, and it was very hard to keep up with the amount of pills they wanted me to take. I mean, it was a fish oil study done, 15 years ago, it was just really hard to keep up with taking all these capsules, and I would have to submit all of them that they would see that I didn't take them all, and I'd always have to explain. I couldn't keep up. So doctors are likely, maybe they have more of a schedule, and it'll be more likely that they'll comply because it's their practice and it's their industry, their profession, and they understand the seriousness of the results and they want to use the results in their practice. So they would be more likely to comply. Now, somebody else already mentioned you want to make groups with similar characteristics. That's also true. So factors that may influence the risk of dying of heart attack or the risk of dying of cancer, factors like stress, lifestyle, and income, education. These are factors that are associated with health outcomes as severe as cancer and heart attack. And it would be the case that doctors are more similar in those characteristics than if I was to include doctors and race car drivers and athletes and professors and other groups of people. So that's why we'd pick physicians. Now, there is variation among physicians on those predictors that I mentioned, like income and education and these things. There is variation, but it's not going to be as wide as it would be to admit other professionals. Okay, so those are the reasons. Does anybody have any questions? All right, so with 21,996, what we would do is you always begin with labeling. So what would be the label on the first doctor? So what would be the first label? Right. Since the last one will be 21996, all the labels have to have 5 digits. So the first one will be 00001, then 00002, all the way to this 21996. All right. No, we just label them depending on the number of individuals in the list, or on the number of subjects that will be randomized. Okay? The next thing we do is then we use a random digits generator, or we could put 21,996 slips of papers with these numbers on them, with these labels, into a hat. But we're probably going to use a number generator, and it will give us a list. And let's say in that list, the first one was 02831. So in that case, you go down to 02831, and that's Dr. Lee. So Dr. Lee ends up in the study. Well, they're all, actually, as I mentioned before, well, that didn't work. They're all going to participate in this study. It's a matter of which treatment group they're going to go to. So Dr. Lee would be assigned to treatment 1. That would be this group. So let's say the next one was 00002. And then that means that Dr. Zhao would go to the next treatment group. Now, I could just pick the first bunch to go into the first one, but I'm going to do it this way. Okay, I'm going to assign sequentially. So now Dr. Zhao would go here. All right, and I continue. The next one that I get will go here. And so on. All right. Okay, so how many approximately will be in each group if I keep going? Because the next one's going to go here. So we do this until we've assigned all 21,996. So what you have to do is divide that by 4 to know how many people in each group. So it's approximately something more than 5,000, right? Right. So we're going to say it's 5,000, almost 500. So you guys gave me an exact number. Okay, so it's going to be almost 5,500 in each one. And then what's going to happen is, when we conduct the study, the outcome, the number of male doctors that died of cancer will be recorded over time. And we're going to compare the outcomes between those who got aspirin. Did I say cancer? They died of heart attack, sorry. The number of doctors who died of a heart attack will be compared to the ones that died of a heart attack without taking aspirin, just taking a placebo. And it turned out that 239 people in the placebo group died of a heart attack, but less died in the aspirin group. So this was significantly less. So now our outcome that we're looking for is that it be low, right? And this is considered significantly lower. So we believe then that we found evidence that heart attack is reduced, and mortality by heart attack is reduced by taking aspirin daily. Similarly, the people who took beta-carotene and died from cancer are compared to those who took the placebo and died from cancer. And in this case, they didn't find a difference. And so they concluded that there was no evidence to say that taking beta-carotene as a supplement reduces the risk of cancer death. Okay, questions? Okay, so we see here in this exercise that there are 4 treatment groups. And it makes sense to us. What if we had an experiment where there were many factors, like four factors and 2 levels, again with placebo and treatment group. How many treatments would be in this case? 4 factors and 2 levels each. So here it was 2 factors and 2 levels each, and it created a 2 by 2 table, or 4 different treatments. The way that you figure it out is using this. To figure out the total number of treatments, you use the number of levels of factor 1 multiplied by the number of levels of factor 2. So, and the number of levels of factor 3, etc. So how many would be in this case if it was 2 levels for each? Very good, Yvette. It would be 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. It's a good try, but you didn't get it. But you're close. So it would be 2 to the power 4, which is 4 times 4, which is 16. Just got to multiply one more time. It's not 4 times 2. It's 2 to the power of 4. There's a 4 in there for sure, but it's 2 to the power of 4. Levels of factor 1 times levels of factor 2 times levels of factor 3 times levels of factor 4. So it's 2 to the 4 is 16. Is that okay? Okay. Yeah, you were thinking the same. There's a 4 and a 2, but it's a power relationship, not multiplication. All right. Oh, I have my solutions here. Okay, so what about this problem below? I'm going to grab the question. So why don't you try this one? I'll give you some time to read it, and then I'll tell you the answer. Okay, good. Some of you got it? Right. So you have, it tells you, 3 agents, 3 types of flour, and 2 mixing methods. So agent, redox agent, types of flour, and mixing methods are the 3 factors, and they have different number of levels. Agents have 3 levels, types of flour has 3 levels, and mixing method has 2 levels. So we use the rule, and we see that three levels for the first one times 3 levels for the second one times 2 levels gives you 18 treatments. There's 3 factors with 18 treatments, and then and 4 responses. So what I want to ask you is, how do I visualize those 18 treatments? Here I was able to visualize the 4 of them as a table with aspirins 2 and beta-carotenes 2, but how would you visualize 18 treatments? Does anybody know how to see 18 treatments? Remember, if the screen is blurry, just refresh. Any ideas? So what we could have is I could have redox agents, of which there are 3 different ones, and then flours, of which there are 3 different ones, and I can combine and get redox agent 1 with type of flour 1, and then redox agent 1 with type of flour 2, and redox agent 1 with type of flour 3, and so on. You see? And I could do this all with mixing method 1. That's only 9. But I can repeat this. I can duplicate this. And do it for mixing method 2. And there you have 18. You see it? So that's all the possible combinations of 3 factors, with the first 2 having 3 levels and the last one having 2 levels. So if we think there are other factors that influence the response variables here, we should probably make more than just 1 loaf in each one. We should make a few, right? Because there might be some variation in the outcome of these variables due to things I wasn't able to control for. So you could have a variety of them here, maybe 5 different loaves, and then you can measure those outcomes. So notice there is no control group here. I'm just comparing loaves on 4 different response variables. There are no controls. Why is there no control group? Yeah, but Lydia, block design is something different. Here I'm just mixing them, all the combinations. So my question was, why is there no control group here? Right, we want to compare results between methods and ingredients. We want to compare, results between methods and ingredients. And we do not need a control group. Why? Right, it's not a human experiment. Okay, so you can have controls in a sense that if you want to see if like a fertilizer treatment that was developed is better than an old fertilizer treatment, that's still comparing treatments to each other. It's not exactly a control, but in human subjects you have to have a control group. Okay, with non-human subjects you don't have to. It might make sense to have something like a control group, but you don't have to. Okay, so it's human subjects that require a control group for the reasons we explained. Human subjects require a control group. All right. Any more questions or comments? So that's what I wanted to say about control. Even though we've talked about randomization, I want to cover randomization now. I did describe it in the physician health study example. But here's another one. Random means that no one subject has a greater chance of being allocated to one treatment versus another. You don't allow your test subjects to choose if they want to be in the treatment or control group, right? Of course, the sicker patients would be more desperate and even pay, if they could, to be in a treatment group to try an experimental drug. So that would definitely bias your outcomes. You don't want that. Right, Gabrielle says, if there was related to the last experiment, if there was a standard recipe for bread, maybe that could be used as a control to compare the alterations of variables. Very good, yes. Exactly. Okay. So we want to make sure that we're conducting a randomization, not just, people use the word random to mean that they're just choosing without consideration, but that's not what random is. There's a pattern, there's an order in randomness. Okay? Randomizing requires that you first list your candidates and you label them, and the length of the label depends on how many candidates you have. In this case, for a human experiment, we have 8, so it's only one digit, so we can number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And in this randomization, we want to pick 4 volunteers to be in the treatment and 4 for the control group. So we put the labels in, and then we use a random digits table. And you see here, as I go through, I go by 1. Make it bigger. I go by 1 at a time. So 0 is not in the list. 1 to 8 is. So this one would be the first one we would pick. 9 is not on the list. 0 is not on the list. So we skip those. 7 is. So we pick 7 for our group. Then 5 is already taken. So we ignore it. And 0 is not on the list. The next one is 4. 9 is not on the list, 5 was already taken, so then we pick 1. So these are the 4 that go into the new treatment group. So that is Rodriguez, Tulane, Munoz, and Castro. So that's that's letter B. And the others would go into the control group. Remember that we use all the subjects that qualify for the study or meet them, are positively screened and allowed into the study. Okay, any questions about that? So you saw that several times in the videos. All right, another point on randomization. Unless you have a comment. Any comments? So this is my 4th experiment. In this experiment, we are going to study energy conserving behaviors and whether certain education or certain monitoring can encourage people to conserve energy. This is a human experiment, so we are going to have a control group, but we have to talk about what that would look like. What would the control group look like? So what we do first is we invite, we advertise for participation of households in this study, in investigation, and we actually are able to get 60 households to agree to participate. Then we randomize them. We label the 60 and use a random digits generator, 01, 02, 03, all the way to 60. And we assign them to groups 1, group 2, and group 3, depending, how they emerge. And we believe that 20 houses in each group is enough to make similar groups. So the groups are not different. They have, thinking about the factors that are predictors in energy conserving behavior, we believe 20 houses is enough, and the groups in those, considering those factors that influence energy conserving, they're similar across groups. I think I repeated myself. All right, so you have just as many people who are not conserving in group 1 as you do in group 2, group 3. You have seniors who are in a fixed income, and they are very good about turning lights off and turning off their Wi-Fi, or not leaving equipment on, or they don't have a lot of equipment. They don't have a lot of computers and things that, let's say, a working person would have. So seniors who are retired, they would be less likely, or they'd be more likely, to conserve energy. So we'll say 20 houses seems enough to be able to have as many seniors in there as in here, okay? So they're not systematically different groups, that's what we believe. Then what we've done is we've conducted some research, and there are 2 different methods that we want to explore as having positive impact on electricity use. So one is this is the meter treatment. So all 3 groups of households are told that they've been enrolled in this experiment, and they will be visited by research staff to orient them, provide orientation on the experiment. The households in treatment 1 will be told that they will have their meter read on a random basis. Someone will show up, not unannounced, to test the meter. They have to agree to participate in this study. So assuming they've agreed, they'll just be having someone randomly show up. Now, knowing that someone's going to randomly show up and read your electricity meter might make you change your behavior, right? Because you're being watched. It might make you rebellious and change your behavior in a negative way. You don't want to be controlled. So it could be, if you have kids in the house, they're a little more rebellious. So it can affect behavior to know you're being watched. That's why we have to have a control group. So then if this treatment, this meter treatment group, the meter actually helps, it has to do better than in reducing electricity use than the reduction in electricity use by the control group. All right, so the chart group, these people are told that, all of them are told they'll be visited. When these group of houses are visited, the researchers describe how, they give them a booklet and a special pen, and they say, that shows that they're participating in this research project, and they're told that they have to chart their meter use. They have to read their meter and record it, and that randomly someone will come and check their meter to make sure that they're entering the values in the chart correctly. So they're going to be monitored as well, but they're also self-monitoring. So this is providing a feedback, right? And there's some research that shows that can do a better job than just being monitored in changing behaviors, because there'll be a tendency for these households to get a thrill of seeing their chart demonstrate a reduced electricity use. And so they engage themselves more like a game in trying to improve upon their electricity use by reducing it. So in the control group, they're also told they'll be visited randomly, and their electricity meter will be read by a research staff member. But otherwise, nothing else will be done with them. They won't be taught about charts. They won't be told anything else. The meter will be read at the beginning, and in fact, they will not have any other reading done except at the end. So no one does show up. There is no intervention. Okay, they're just told the same information that the others are told, but they don't see anyone show up to actually read their meter except for at the initiation and the end of the experiment. In the end, their electricity use is compared across the treatment groups to see if there's any differences. So that is my best example of a double-blind controlled trial. This is not exactly double-blind because they know which group they're in, but they don't know other people in the study, and they don't know, what different treatments they received. So it's not precisely double-blind, but it is controlled. Okay, so that's my best explanation of experiment 4. Any comments or questions? Okay. All right, so then we've talked about randomization, we've talked about control, and just a few words about replication. Generally, the larger the control group and the larger the treatment group, the easier or better it is to establish systematic differences between the treatment. So you want to have enough subjects in each of your groups. Now, what is enough from one study to another may vary, but the point is that it's important to have replication so that you can actually observe those differences, and those differences are considered attributable to the treatment, not to other factors. So the more the better, but that's controlled also, for slight improvement or for stronger results. We talk about having all of the population data, but that's expensive. Okay, similarly in these experiments, having more and more subjects, it may make your results more reliable. However, at a cost. So you have to weigh those two. I took a course in sampling over 20 years ago, and in all of our estimates of sample size was a letter C for cost per unit. We always had to be aware of the cost of sampling to control for to operate a budget. You didn't want to spend more than you could. All right, any questions? So it sounds like some of you guys have already read through the notes. I hope it's helpful that I'm repeating them. I hope I'm not wasting your time. There are some things that need some explanation. Here I asked about using rats that you catch in a field. To obtain experimental subjects for medical experiments on the effects of new treatments on cancer in human tissue, researchers use an approach of catching rats in a field. They use the first 15 they catch. So what's a problem with that? What's a possible lurking variable? Something that influences your outcome, but you aren't considering when conducting the experiment. Well, you will have completely ignored the health status of the rats. In fact, if you're able to catch them, it means they're slower than the rest. And they might be slower because they're weaker or sicker than the others that got away. Now, you don't want to have some sort of bias in your rats. So I explained to you about rats as subjects in experiments yesterday. And the fact is, ironically, they are genetically manufactured to have certain characteristics, and sometimes they're manufactured to have certain traits, genetic traits that can be studied. And it turns out, as I explained, that the opposite happens. Turns out that they're actually more they're even more healthy than the average rat, and that they'll live longer and they're more robust or resilient against treatments that could otherwise harm the regular or average rat. So that's kind of ironic, and it's still a matter of time for research to figure out how to deal with that. Okay, the next question was, what is the effect of the outcome of the study? Will it bias upward or downward, or is it unclear? And I mentioned that we're studying the effect of a treatment on cancer. So they're going to subject the rats to carcinogens, and if they're weaker or sicker rats, they're going to succumb to the cancer and be less likely to revive or to help mitigate the carcinogenic effect that they've been exposed to. And this will bias down your results. It'll make it look worse. It will make it look less effective in your treatment. So someone said it's possible that they've got all the rats in one area. And they're just so they're similar. They're too similar in a certain way, and they're not very representative. I think that's what you meant, right, Nivette? So they're not representative. They're all basically have the same, and they're not representative of rats in general. And in that case, it's just unclear. You'd have to be more specific, about how that affects it, upward or downward bias. If they're all the same, you're just not going to get a representative result. That would be the consequence. Okay, so then you really want an experiment to have generalizability and realism. So you have to consider if the experiment will really generalize to a larger scale or to the general population to make it useful. So for instance, experiments conducted, usually they're first a smaller version is conducted to try and get all the glitches out of the experiment. These are called pilot projects. So, in television and in, I guess, in Netflix now, or streaming services, they run pilots. So they just have one episode or two episodes to try out the film or the production to see what viewers they can attract. So similarly, in an experiment, just a small version of the project is conducted to make sure that it can be carried out and to see, what unexpected. There's always unexpected things that can happen. So then the larger project can be conducted without having those pitfalls or mistakes. It's really important in agricultural experiments that those crops are exposed to the elements. So if you wanted to study fertilizer or some developed pesticide or herbicide, you want to make sure that first you run a pilot, a smaller scale project in a lab for safety reasons, and then once safety has been determined, that it go to the field, so where the open elements can be at play, because essentially that's unrealistic. If it's all done in a lab, you don't know really how that treatment or that new product is going to perform in the natural environment. So this isn't easy. Further, if you're conducting like medical experiments, the results, and I use the example of patients undergoing treatment for, let's say, Alzheimer's, right? So if they're in a controlled setting like in a healthcare home or a long-term care, where they have 24-hour assistance, where a nurse is administering their treatment or their medicines, if they're enrolled in a study, they can be the researchers can be sure that they're taking their medication, right? Because it's being administered, it's being controlled by someone capable of caring for that individual who's lost cognition or awareness. So then in the real world, you just wouldn't have an idea of how that drug, that treatment for Alzheimer's, say, would even perform if the person, they would have to have maybe a patch or something like that. It would have to be developed in a way that a person who has or suffers from memory loss or memory challenges, that they wouldn't have to remember to take their treatment. So, right, this has to be considered in the product development, and that needs to be studied so that it can go out to the general population. And I mentioned the aspartame. Studies of aspartame have on rats have been controversial. Dosing is really important. There have been a couple of issues with treatments for COVID recently where it's been argued that the wrong doses were used in studying different alternative treatments, that in some the doses were high enough, in others the doses were too great. Some of these aspartame studies used very high doses of aspartame, and they showed seizures in rats. And the question of whether this is generalizable to the human population remains controversial. So you want to make these experiments as realistic as possible, and it's hard when you have to study for ethical reasons. You can't study humans. A real big challenge is studies on children and getting them to engage in studies. So a lot of in the last 20, 30 years, children have been administered drugs that don't have trials. These are drugs for what they call attention deficit disorder or attention hyperactivity disorder. I'm trying to think of the terms. So these treatments that are administered to kids have never been studied on kids officially in an experimental setting, because question about children being able to give informed consent has remained. It's questionable that they actually can. And it's actually quite alarming right now that children without studies on any treatment are being administered drugs that would go to adults in adult doses. So there's lots of concern around treating kids off, they call that off-label, when the studies aren't done because of ethical reasons around informed consent, but then they're being administered nonetheless. So there's like an impasse about doing proper experiments, and we're just left with observational studies of what are the outcomes on children of using these drugs. And we already know observational studies are not experiments. You still need to do an experiment. And one of the classic examples of that are with hormone replacement therapy. Hormone replacement therapy was thought to be very effective with low risk. With low risk in the 90s, and women who were suffering from menopause in their 50s and 60s, menopausal symptoms are vast. I have to tell you, I had no idea. But more recently, I have experienced them, and they are, I never even heard of some of these things that happen. And they were happening to me. So, and I wasn't even prepared to admit it, because I couldn't place it. I never even heard about some of these symptoms. Internal tremors, never even heard of that. I had to, Google only works if you know the word you're looking up. When you don't know the word you're looking up, you try to find ways to phrase it, to research. And it took me months to figure out what was wrong. I'd never heard of such a thing. And then when I saw a doctor for something else and mentioned some of these symptoms I was experiencing, he told me, this is what you need. I couldn't even believe it, and I even resisted for a long time. But now that I'm receiving the treatment, I'm doing great. And the issue is, though, that it's not for everyone, and it needs to be monitored. Now, what happened in the 90s were otherwise, women who were educated or had high incomes, or were working, and they needed to, for performance, they sought out some respite or they wanted a break from their symptoms, and they sought a consult from their doctor to see about getting this treatment. And doctors would administer it and monitor, and it just became customary that patients would have access to this treatment. But when it was studied in experimentation, it was found that it actually it made a heart attack, it increased the risk of heart attack, it increased the risk of some other health conditions. And why did that happen, and why wasn't it noticed before? Well, because all studies were observational, and those were women selecting to get the treatment themselves. So these were women with the money, the means, and the lifestyle that was associated with better health outcomes than the average woman. And when women were enrolled in the study and incentivized to participate and then randomized, it turned out that it really wasn't good. And those doctors were told to take precautions and to monitor anyone receiving hormone replacement therapy very closely. So yeah, you really do need to do the experiment. And there's no substitute for a good experiment. Oh. Any comments or questions? All right, so some of you have mentioned block designs. I'm going to talk about, we're going to start with a discussion on matched pairs design. Okay, so the classic matched pair, I just noticed this is missing here. The classic matched pair would be a set of twins in human beings. So a set of twins. These individuals have identical genetics, if they're identical twins. And if you get enough identical twins to enroll in studies, then you can subject one of the twins to treatment, one of the twins to control, not tell them which received which, and you can observe the effect. So you can do that with drugs, you can do that with environmental or some sort of training exercise. You're trying to teach them something, or just to test a different treatment, whether it's medical or psychological. You can test it really well on twins. Now, there's not a lot of twins to go around for studies, but it is, I don't know if you've ever seen in documentaries where researchers have studied identical twins separated at birth to observe characteristics and be able to say, well, some characteristics are the effect of environment, and which characteristics are predictive in terms of genetics. So, for instance, twins separated at birth, either because one of them was adopted out or somehow separated, when they reunite, researchers have invited them to reunited twins to studies where they ask them a series of questions to find out about what's similar and what's different between them. So it's not uncommon that they will have maybe similar jobs, similar interests. Some have even had that. You can ask if it's a coincidence. You'd have to see enough pairs of twins separated at birth to know if it's a coincidence or not. But some have even had the same, their wives have the same name, or their spouse has the same name. So it's very interesting to see the results of those studies. So it's subjected to different environments, but with the same genetics, without having contact for 30, 40 years, looking at their characteristics. It's very interesting. All right, so another classic study of matched pairs, and it looks quite different, but the classic example is the Coke versus Pepsi taste testing, known as the Pepsi Challenge. So the Pepsi challenge, I don't know, you're probably too young and haven't seen it before, but the Pepsi challenge was very popular for decades, where a kiosk would be set up at a fair or in a mall, and people would be invited, passers-by would be invited to participate in the challenge. I don't know if they would call it the Pepsi challenge to them. I can't remember, but you could see examples on YouTube of the Pepsi challenge. And so this was really Pepsi's initiative. They made commercials based on the Pepsi challenge. So people would be called over and be asked to taste test cans of cola, and then they'd have to say which can they preferred. Now this is, the way it was conducted, is considered a matched pairs design. It's considered an experiment. So to be an experiment, it would have to be the case that there is control, that there is randomization, and there is replication. So I want you to describe to me what would be the control, what would be the randomization, and what would be the replication of such a experiment. Right. Randomization, because the people do not know which beverage they are going to get. So the cola should be covered, right? There shouldn't be a label on it. It should look identical, whether it's Pepsi or Coke. But randomization would be in so that's like what you said was not the randomization part, but it is about the Pepsi and the Coke. The order in which the cans are administered is randomization, is randomly done. And this is all determined by a third party. The individual giving the cans of Coke just sees a 1 and a 2 on it, but doesn't know which one is which, okay? Not until it's revealed. In the commercials, they would have it covered by a label, and then they just tear off the label and show it was Pepsi that people were picking. That was the essence of the commercial. I don't even know how true it was, if it's just propaganda, but anyway, it was always Pepsi, right? So randomization would be the order. Okay, the order of the cans tasted. What would be the control? What would be the replication? Oh, interesting. Coca-Cola changed their formula after that experiment. Yeah, it's interesting because I do, well, I guess I don't really drink either cola anymore, but if I was in a club or a bar and I felt pressured to have a drink, I would get probably Pepsi, because cola just is not sweet enough. Coke is not sweet enough. I would get a Pepsi and add lime, and probably diet, which is probably not a great idea either, but it's so rare that I drink it, I don't think it's going to hurt me. Right, they don't let them, so they covered their eyes, Nivette. I don't know if they covered their eyes, but they did cover, in the videos I saw, they would cover the cans with like some paper, construction paper, and they would peel it off to reveal which one they liked. So they're not supposed to know which one they were drinking. The control es el tapar las etiquetas. Okay, so you guys are going to be surprised about what the control is. The control is the person themselves. So the idea is usually the treatment and control are different, right? They're different treatments. You can even see that we call treatment 1 and we'd say control or treatment 2. So we can refer to the control as treatment 2. And these would usually, conventionally, be different groups of people. So someone would get the treatment, a different person would get the control. In a matched pair, one of the pair has to get treatment 1 and the other pair has to get treatment 2. So that one person, and the pairs would come, and so it would be like the pair gets both treatment and control, one of each. Got it? So in the Pepsi versus Coke, they let the person themselves be their own control. Why? Because, okay, it's not a twin, I don't have twins to study in a pair, but I can just let one person have both Coke and Pepsi. Because they don't change from drinking one to another, they're otherwise they're the same person, so they would have point of reference to decide which drink they prefer. So the point is that the pair gets both treatments. In this case, the pair is the person themselves, and they get both treatments. So we have, and that's surprising when you hear that, but that's how it works. So the control is the person themselves. Randomization is the order of the cans tasted. That's predetermined. And it's not decided by the individual conducting the experiment. They were numbered by a third party that was hired to manage the study and label 1 and 2 the cans in a way that the first person getting the cans would have possibly a different order than the second person getting the cans. So the person is the control because it's a matched pair. And because they're asking people by convenience who are just passing by, that person might not have a twin, right? So how am I going to find a pair that are otherwise identical to test 2 treatments on? I can't. But if somebody, like this is different, I couldn't do this if I was studying, let's say, aspirin, right? Because let's say I was doing the aspirin and the placebo for aspirin, I couldn't do both of those treatments on one person because taking the aspirin is going to affect the biochemistry of a person, and then them not taking the aspirin is going to be meaningless because they already had the aspirin. So you can't do a drug study on a person as a matched pair. But in the Coke versus Pepsi, it doesn't matter if somebody drinks Coke and they drink Pepsi. It doesn't change their biochemistry. I mean, we'll assume that it doesn't. Maybe between drinking the different cans, they rinse their mouth with water or, just to remove the flavor of the previous drink. Or they take a break in between somehow. Okay, very good. Okay, so how do we conduct a matched pair? It just compares 2 treatments. You choose pairs of subjects that are closely matched as possible. One will receive one treatment and the other will receive the other treatment. Assign the treatments randomly, or randomly select a sample of subjects who will receive both treatments, and also the order in which the treatment is administered is conducted in a random fashion. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about here. So the last thing is replication. How do I ensure replication to ensure this is a good experiment? Then the Pepsi versus Coke example. Right. Just replication would be facilitated by just a number of people. That volunteer or present themselves to participate in the study. Okay? So in the video, at the very beginning, there's a pizza, like it looks like a focus group, really. It's called a focus group, where people sit around a table, they taste pizza, they talk about the pizza, and the research staff records the comments that are made, the expression, how people express their the experience of tasting different pizzas. In that case, you can see it as an experiment in a way that each of the people are tasting different pizzas, right? So that's kind of a match pairs. The fact that I put them all in a or that they're all in a room together with other subjects talking about things, it kind of removes the experimental quality because they know what they're tasting. But I don't know, I put it in there. But I think it's just like a match pair. It's not an experiment though, because they know what they're testing. So it's not a double-blind controlled study. It's just a focus group. So I don't know. I put it there, but I don't think that's accurate actually. But this was a focus group. I think the only element that made it seem like it was match pairs that the person is trying all the treatments. I really want you to remember that fact. For match pairs where the person is their own control, they get all the treatment. That's the main thing I want you to get out of this discussion. Because the pair, you see, has to get both treatment and control if it's a person. And if it's an individual themselves, then they have to get both treatments because they are the pair. All right. So match pairs design is an example of a block design. Block design is described below here. So here is my block design. In discussing the block design, I begin here and I say, let's say we want to study cancer treatment, a new cancer treatment on people with cancer, okay? And let's say I don't specify who can participate. I just enroll people who are cancer patients. Cancer patients who aren't that sick that they could succumb to the treatment, or get even sicker because of the treatment. But they qualify because they have early stage cancer. All right. So we want to look at the effect of this treatment. We label all of our participant volunteers. So we start labeling them. Let's say there were 60 and we're going to put 20 in each group like the other experiment. Or that's too few, right? Let's say there's 300. So we're going to start labeling all of them. And we're going to put 100 in each group. And the first 100 we choose randomly go into group 1. The second 100 go into group 2, and the rest go into group 3. So each one will have 100 subjects. The first group will get the new treatment. The second group will get the old treatment. And the third group will get the control. So they'll just get a placebo. And we'll compare their survival rates. So this is an experiment. I have a control group. I randomized, and I have enough subjects in each that I believe I should be able to see differences. But I did add in the statement of this experiment an issue. The issue was that we know in advance that women that take this medication, what did I say? I said men and women have distinctly different hormone physiology. So they respond differently to the treatments, this treatment. So what does that mean? That means if, I think this is too big of a file. This happens. I have to be careful. So what this means is if I just conduct the experiment like this, I'm going to try and make it big again. Doesn't like it. If I conduct the experiment this way and I randomize, it could be the case, it could happen that group 1 was filled with all women. And group 2 was just men, and this is a mix of men and women. Well, that would certainly confound results, because I might not be just measuring the effectiveness of this therapy. I might just be, it might just be reflecting the impact of women with this therapy, not the general population with this therapy. And similarly, if I just had men over here, I'm not getting a good sense of how people respond to the old therapy to compare it. So if women in general don't do as well as men on this new therapy, it's going to look like the new therapy is not effective. All right, because I only have women and they're not as responsive as men to this new therapy. So this whole discussion about there being a difference between men and women makes me think I should split this up. So it's a natural characteristic that creates the blocking. The block is just something, it's not something I make up, it's something, it's a characteristic that already exists. I don't have to assign men to being men, I just divide the men and the women. If I didn't do it this way, I would have to enroll more subjects into my study to make it more mixed, and that's costly. To avoid that, I would just study men and women separately, and you see it's the same setup, but I conduct a study for men and a study for women. So I would have to go back and reclassify people as men and women and do the randomization. So let's say conveniently there's 150. I don't know what to do. I think I have to erase some files. This is just a big file. I think I'll use the non-annotated. That's what I'll do. Let me open that one up. should be fine. So here we're going to split up subjects into men and women, and then conduct the experiments I described. Usually women are more likely to participate in experiments. Men are busy, traditionally more busy. Anyway, it just seems like that. So let's say we ended up with 180 women willing to participate and 120 men. And then you divide that by 3, so it would be 60 in each group, right? So there would be 60 here, 60 here, 60 here, and then divided by 3 is 40, 40, 40, and 40. And that's how you would conduct the experiment. And this is a block design. So if you know in advance of a characteristic that can be teased apart, you can block in your experiment. So the characteristic of being male, you perform better with the drug with less adverse events than women. If that's the case, you need to separate them. Okay, and then I asked some questions here. How does a block design differ from a completely randomized design? I mean, it's still completely randomized, but is there more information supplied? Yes, there's more information because there's more restrictions providing more information, more detailed information. And I make a note here, we're going to talk about sampling design. A block in experimental design is comparable to a stratum in sampling design. We'll talk about that. So the next question, the primary reason for using a matched pairs design or block design rather than a completely randomized design. So we are, just make a note, these are completely randomized within the block. It's not just one randomization, okay? So it is completely randomized in the block where the subjects are receiving all treatments. So notice this block is like yeah, this is like the pair because they're getting see, it's not exactly a matched pairs, it's like a little more expanded because it's not just 2, there's 3 treatments, but the fact is that they're receiving all the treatments, and here within this block you're receiving all the treatments. So in that sense, it's like the pair receiving all the treatments. That's what makes matched pairs a kind of a block design. So the last question is, the primary reason for using a matched pair design or a block design rather than a completely randomized design is, which is the best answer? You can tell me. More restrictions that we restricted, only men can be here, only women can be here. So by doing that, we get more information. than if we put them all together in one. And we're unclear about what our results mean. Okay, so someone said here, A is the answer. It's true. More precise conclusions about the treatments can be obtained for the same cost. It's not true that if we pair a block, we can avoid the process of randomization. We did randomize. We didn't avoid randomization. Randomization occurs within the block. It is easier to assign the treatment to pairs or blocks rather than individual subjects. We're not assigning the treatments to the block. We're assigning all the treatments to all the blocks. This is not even sensical. Okay, pairing or blocking effectively increases the number of subjects in the experiment. No, it does the opposite. By blocking, we don't have to include more subjects. Pairing or blocking effectively increases the number of treatments. No, we have the same number of treatments in each block. Okay, so these are just wrong. Okay. All right. If you don't have any more questions, I'm going to talk about sampling a bit. And we did talk about the difference between populations and samples, parameters and statistics. And I make a point here to mention to you to remember the terminology. Remember, parameters in populations and statistics in samples. That's what that's all about. The P and the P. Because these terms are used very loosely, I have to be clear at the beginning what they actually mean in the context of statistics. So statistics are computed in samples, so we'll start with S. Okay, and we talked about the goal of statistics, to gain information from data about a variable for the purpose of prediction. And then I give some examples here about different parameters. The sample statistic is intended to estimate a population parameter when it is not possible to get all the values. So example 1, the mean or average height and standard deviation measure a variation of heights of women 18 and over in a country are examples of parameters that we're interested in. These are known as the population mean, mu. So this is the symbol. You may or may not have seen this before. This is the symbol for population mean. And this is the symbol for population standard deviation. And it becomes a convention that the Greek letters are used for population parameters, okay? So when you see Greek letters, you are talking about population characteristics. When you see alphanumeric letters, like X bar is the sample mean, and S is the sample standard deviation. These are statistics. So the way it goes is that X bar estimates the population mean, and S estimates the population standard deviation. I lost the bar here. Let me fix that. No, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to do this. Okay. And that's what I say here, and I write this chart. These are the parameters and statistics that we focus on in the class. X bar estimates mu, S estimates sigma. We'll talk more about, this is mu, Greek letter M for mean. This is Greek letter S for standard deviation. And this is just a P italicized for proportion, and that's estimated by P italicized with a hat on it. These are all estimates of these. Those are the standard symbols that are used in statistics. So these are just examples of some of the statistics we're going to work with. In the video, you were introduced to, I think it was a Frito-Lay plant, and there you can talk about the population of all potatoes, right? And taking an account of all the individual members or subjects of the population, they're known as units. When you take a sample, those members of the sample are known as sample units. So in the video, in the non-human sample, I would say it was the Frito-Lay plant or potato chips, potatoes. It was the potatoes. The potatoes that arrived at the plant, and they studied them, took a sample to determine if they were going to accept the shipment. This is a quality control measure. And in that case, I actually filled this in, I don't remember now. I'd have to look at the other notes. Let's see if I can open that without too much trouble this time. Nope, it won't let me. It's just too big of a file because I marked it up. No. So you guys can tell me, what am I going to put there? So for the potatoes, what was the population? Okay, you guys have it. 45,000 pounds of potatoes showed up. And what were the units? The units were the potatoes in the trucks. And what was the sample? Was it 50 buckets? I think. And the sample units were the potatoes in those buckets. Right? Does that look right? Was it 50 buckets? How many buckets was it, guys? I can't find my notes easy enough. It was 5 buckets? I think it was more, no? Can you believe I'm wasting time on this? I'm just looking for the file. It's 5. Okay. I got one of the numbers right. Oh, 30 pounds each. Okay. So 5 buckets of 30 pounds each. That was enough to determine whether they would keep the shipment of 45,000 pounds. All right, so you want to make sure that your samples are representative, okay? And there's examples that we're aware that are not representative. So this is an example of a company that was involved in precious metals mining that was sending updates to their investors demonstrating that they were finding the metals they were looking for, in this case pieces of steel, that they were finding them in large quantities repeatedly, and it turned out they were just sending the same samples, not that they were digging or looking any deeper into their minds. And this was considered fraud, and actually there were investigations because there was concern about one executive that either committed suicide or was murdered as a result of the, I guess, cover-up. So yeah, you don't want to do that. The company had a lot of trouble after that reestablishing their reputation. You want to be sure that the sample is representative, and in the case of voluntary response samples, you want to ensure that you ward against any people with strong emotional opinions overriding the others. Now that doesn't make so much for a good show. If you ever listen to these radio call-in shows, they like to bring in the extravagant people to speak because they're entertaining, but they're not necessarily representative of the average person. So their opinion is very biased in the end, or the general opinion on these shows turns out being biased and not representative. And basing conclusions on the response of individuals in a special interest group is also misleading and not representative of the general public. I'm not a big fan of favoring any interest groups. It's just highly politically charged and not representative of the general population and their needs. So, I do mention here about simple random samples and how to draw a simple random sample. And I just make it very simple example here, an exercise. How do you choose a sample of size 3 from a population of 28? Well, always start with labeling, right? And because there are 28 subjects, you would start labeling with 2 digits, 01, 02, up to 28. And then choosing from there, you have to choose Valeria. I think, didn't Valeria Gonzalez say 5 buckets of 30 pounds each? Oh. I fit it in, right? I answered that already. Okay. So here I'm going to take 2 at a time and look for numbers between 0 and 28. So if I pick, so let's see. So this is between 0 and 28, so I'll pick that one. But this is not a number between 0 and 28, so I'll skip that. 75, also I'll skip that. Then I get here 4. That's a number between 0 and 28. So I'm going 2 at a time. 95 is not. 11 is. So am I done? So that means that I would choose the subject number 5, subject number 4, and subject number 11. And yeah, I'm not sure what I was going to say. Oh, I wanted to say that you can get a random digits generating table. You can just get that online if you need it. You can also program in statistical software, even in Excel, a random numbers generator. You can find YouTube videos on how to do that, or read the instructions in Excel on how to do that through the help menu, or just go online and find instructions. Okay, here's another example. So I wanted to show you that how to choose 2 at a time. In this exercise, there are 8 people who suffer from migraines, and they want to take part in a focus group on their preference for over-the-counter medication. 4 of these subjects are assigned to group 1 and 4 to group 2. First, we have to attach labels. Now, what the issue is here is I don't tell you how to label. I don't give precise instructions on how to label, so you're kind of left, with the possibility that someone could label these as I could label them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That could be one set of labels. And then I have to pick one at a time. And what would be my choice then? Well, 0 is not there, so I ignore that. 5 is there, so I would pick that one. So that's Chang. And then 9 is not there, 0 is not there, 7 is the next one. And then 5 is already chosen, 0 is not there, so 4. So 5, 7, and 4. So 5, 7, and 4. Oh, I need 4 subjects, one more, okay. And then 1, and Chang. So Chang, Miller, Reed, Toman is B. So that looks like it's my answer. However, who says I have to label like that? There are no instructions. So it's possible that I could have labeled with 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? Because 0 is also a digit. So let's use this table here. It's the same list as above, but I've numbered things differently. So this is another possibility as a group randomly chosen. So this would make me choose Chang first because of the 0, and then 5, and then 0 is done already, so 7, and then it would be 4. So now I have Chang, Ting, Whittinghill, and Reed. And that gives me, did I mess up? No. Oh, that's D. So that's option D. And finally, how would I get could I get option C? If I use labels of 2 digits, which is also allowed, I mean, as long as they're all the same, that's all that matters. And even though there's only 1 digit, like there's 8 subjects with to choose from, and that gives 1 digit. I could also do this with 2 digits, nothing's stopping me. There are no rules here. Just that the labels have to have the same number of digits. Okay, and then so choosing 2 at a time. Sorry. 1 second. So taking 2 at a time, it's going to be 5, and then I'm not going to use 90 or 75, but then 4, I'm not going to use 95 or 11 or 38 or 44 or 49 or 82 or 20 or 75 or 12. Oh my goodness. Did I miss one? Or 74 or 98 or 12. There it is, 6. So I have 3. I gotta keep going. 94, 52, 87, 71, 75, 39. There we go, 2. So it took a little longer, but I got Reed, Miller, Ting, and Donnelly, and that gives me option C. And that's why the best answer is E. All right, so those are all feasible because I didn't give you any rules on how to label. They're all correct answers. So the best answer is that they're all correct. So E is the best answer. Now, A cannot be an answer because you won't pick the same person twice for an experiment. And once they're chosen, you have to let them go. They're not part of the sample anymore. All right, then I have some discussion here that I want you to read, and you guys can let me know if you have any questions regarding sampling with and without replacement, and a little bit about probability. So read about that, and then we'll discuss it if you have questions. I just want to say a few things about other types of sampling. I say that a probability sample, the general framework for designs is that they use chance to choose a sample. A probability sample is a sample chosen by chance where we know what samples are possible and what chance or probability each possible sample has. A simple random sample has the stricter requirement that each member of the population has an equal chance to be selected. That's important. So a simple random sample is a probability sample with this requirement that each member has an equal chance of being selected. And further, that each, and this is I mentioned before in the notes, and each sample of size n has equal chance of being selected. It's important. Those are different concepts related. All right, so this is not necessarily true in more elaborate sampling probability design. I don't know what that's repetitive there, in sampling designs like stratified or multi-stage sampling. So I just want to say a couple of words about that, and then I'm going to let you go and leave you to review this material. We're going to start with Unit 2, Graphing and Descriptive Statistics, tomorrow. So I leave you to review the homework and practice assignments in anticipation of the test on the weekend. So what's a stratified random sample? So if you remember back in the video, you learned about the survey design that are conducted by the Census Bureau, I think it is, and what they talked about was stratification. They talked about stratifying households into urban, suburban, and rural. And they do this because if they don't, and they want to take a sample of households, because rural communities have less households, you may risk having no rural representation in the study, in the sample, right? Because there's so few. So the motivation for stratified random sampling and conducting simple random sampling after separating your households ensures that you have representation. So this is similar to the block design concept for experiments, where the characteristic of urban, suburban, or rural determines a block in which the randomization takes place. Okay, so you label all urban households and then you collect a simple random sample. You label all suburban households and then you collect a simple random sample. And the same with rural. Okay? So the motivation is proportional representation. The disadvantage of simple random sampling is, what did I call it? The disadvantage of stratified random sampling is just a matter of how do you combine that data in the end. It can be technically difficult and time-consuming, and it could be costly. An example is the census and surveys, and I think the NORC too. There was just a broad survey they talked about at the end, towards the end of the video. Now this is different than multi-stage. Multi-stage, the motivation of multi-stage sampling has to do with it has to do with a matter of labeling. Or identifying lists. How is it that you're going to come up with a list of households? People move. It's hard to get an up-to-date list that stays, an up-to-date list that's current, that once the process of labeling and selection is determined and letters are sent out for people to participate or agree to participate in the survey, people might already have moved. So this is the problem, is getting the list. So it also it's challenging in this case where I've divided people into urban, suburban, rural, but it still suffers the same problem that I might have trouble getting an up-to-date list of households who lives in certain homes in these different areas. So usually stratified sampling and multi-stage is combined, not just a simple random sample is taken. Okay, so at this level, so you take whatever you do there. I'm saying simple random sample or multi-stage sampling is done consistently. You can't just do one or the other, but whatever you choose to do has to be done within the strata. So a stratum is one, and strata are many strata. All right, so what we do, so just to give you an example, say there is a budget to interview only 1,200 households in a country on their consumption of whole foods like fruits and vegetables, as opposed to refined and processed products. Say in this country there are 18 million households in total, so we have a rough idea of the total, but getting a list of all those households is quite costly and maybe not worth it if we can collect a sample. If we can avoid having to make the list. Sorry, my mind trailed off. You can avoid making a list of 18 million. How can we avoid it? Well, let's stick to lists that we know about. We know the regions in this country. Say there are 30 identifiable regions in the country. We can label those. We know what they are, and we can start labeling them 0, 1, 0, 2, up to 30. Get a random digits table and start picking. How many should we pick for our sample? Let's take a simple random sample of a third of them. So let's say we consulted with a statistician and they told us a third is just fine. So you want to take 10 regions. So you randomly select 10 regions, and with those 10, go to the next stage. The next stage is to go down to this level of community. So let's say for convenience that there are 30 communities in each of the 10 regions. So again, we're going to use this labeling scheme and a random digits generator to pick 10. Not 10, 20%. So 20% of 30 is 6. So we're going to pick 6 from each of the 10 regions. So that makes 60 communities. Now out of the 60 communities, we go down a level again and we identify the blocks in the communities. Let's say there's 200 blocks in each community. Now I'm making them the same, but they could be different. That's okay. So now we have 240 blocks. And we're down to the household level now. So now in 240 blocks, we don't have to find 18 million households. We just have to identify all the households in 240 blocks. So for convenience, we say there's 100 households on each block. We have to label just 100 on each block. So we start 001, 002, 100 on each of the 240 blocks. So that's a total of 24,000 households as opposed to 18,000 that we actually have to label. Okay, so that's less challenging. Again, if you can't see clearly, refresh the screen. Mine got very blurry there. I'm watching as you are. Yeah, my connection is waning. All right, so in the end, you're going to pick 5% of 10, so that's 20 households. Sorry, 5% of 100 households, that's 5 households from each block. So 5 times 240 blocks lives 1,200 households that are interviewed. So the only number, the list you need is for 240 times 100 equals 24,000 households are all that you have to identify. and label. It's a lot better than 18 million. So this is a great option. It's very efficient. We don't have to waste a lot of money and resources trying to identify all the subjects for contact and labeling purposes. The disadvantage is just trying to put this all together and estimating how good our statistics are. So we trade off complexity in analysis in devising a framework in which to appropriately combine the results. This can be a disadvantage, but if you have financing, it's best to save your money on the labeling and put it towards consultation on doing this properly. To figure out all these percentages that I've put out here. How did these arise? Well, it was a sampling design that was commissioned, and statisticians qualified to do so were hired. All right? So I am going to stop there. You guys can ask me questions tomorrow about any of this. I'm really done here. This was just, I guess I could talk about this a little bit tomorrow, but otherwise I finished the notes. You have a quiz at the end, you have quizzes online, you have homework and practice assignments to try in advance of tomorrow's class. But otherwise, we're going to begin with the notes on Unit 2 GDS tomorrow. So with that, I'm going to say good night. We'll see you tomorrow. So if you do want to print out your notes, I need you to print out Unit 2 GDS and Unit 2 GDS sample problems. Those are the documents I'm going to refer to. The exam is going to be Unit 1 and Unit 2. Okay, so we're going to dive into Unit 2 and do as much as we can for 2 days, and then you're going to have your test on Saturday. And I give you to 3 o'clock, right, on Sunday? What did I say? I don't even remember. I have to double check. I teach another class and sometimes I get things confused. What did I tell you about the test? Yeah. Oh no, it's 6 hours. Sorry, till 6 hours. 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. That's right. The undergraduate class, I give them some more time. Yes, 9 to 3. Okay? So it will be online, multiple choice, but you have 6 hours to review your notes. You shouldn't have to spend that much time, but because it's such a tight, intensive course, I understand you might need more time. So I'm giving it to you. All right, so good night. Buenas noches. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll stay on for a bit.